I've sat in my therapy office with women who have everything on the surface. They look amazing on paper. They have good careers. They have good marriages. They have kids who turned out okay. They're financially stable. And yet they cry in my office because they feel completely, profoundly alone and a bit lost. I'm talking about people that feel like they're sitting in a room full of people and feeling like nobody actually sees them. And these people often tend to be in midlife, and they're struggling with that transition from a time when everybody needed them to all of a sudden the house is quiet and empty and they're alone and they don't know what to do with themselves. And they feel that loneliness really profoundly. If that sounds familiar, stay with me because we need to talk about what's really going on and what you can do to help yourself. Welcome to Midlife Unfiltered. I'm Heather England, psychotherapist, certified sex therapist, and someone who left the corporate world and went back to grad school at 49. I'm proof that it's never too late to go after the life you want. This podcast is for women who are done performing, done pretending everything's fine, and ready to have real conversations about identity, about desire, about the life you actually want. Recently, a 52-year-old woman sat in my office and she cried so hard her mascara ran down her face. She was absolutely miserable. Her youngest had just moved out, left the home 3 weeks earlier. So this ended 22 years of carpools, sports practices, late night homework, school activities, college activities, friends coming over, all of that gone. The house was quiet in a way that just felt really empty. She told me she didn't know what to do with herself anymore between 9 to 4. She felt like so ridiculous saying it out loud. She was so lonely. She could feel it physically. It was like a pressure in her chest, this big weight. She said, I spent 22 years being the best mom I could be. I was at every game, every school event. I made homemade meals. I volunteered. I did everything right. And then she looked at me with this really bewildered grief. And she said, but I never made time for me, for making close friends, real friends. And now everyone's gone. And I'm just here. And I don't even know how to meet other women anymore. It wasn't her daughter's empty bedroom that crushed her. It was the realization that she had not built a life outside of being needed. She didn't have any idea what to do with her time. Sound familiar? I've heard some version of that story more times than I can count. And if I'm honest, I've lived it. I've felt the grief of 4 kids leaving home and heading to college. The last one graduates in May and is moving back home for a year while she finds a job and gets established. And I think that's going to be its own episode because I think I need to do one about kids moving back home because we really need to navigate that one well. For most of my adult life, I didn't nurture close friendships with other women. I was way too busy building a career, raising my kids, attending to my husband. And underneath all of that busyness was this sense of guilt. Guilt that if I carved out time for myself, for friendships, that would mean taking something away from my children. You know that feeling, especially if you've worked outside the home. It seems like you get so little time with your children as it is that the idea of doing a lot of things for yourself just doesn't feel good. It feels like somehow you're not being a good mom when you do that. So I think our self-care suffers as we raise our children because we are so focused on them and on our home life that we really stop focusing on ourselves and what we need. I told myself while my kids were growing up that I'd invest in friendships later. So one day later arrived, and I remember this just ordinary day when the house was quiet. And I literally stood in the kitchen looking out the window, feeling really restless. I'm pretty social and I like to be around other people, but I realized I didn't have anyone that I really wanted to call just to say, hey, do you want to grab a glass of wine tonight? And in that moment, what I felt was shame, like I was somehow a loser. It wasn't disappointment. It was actual shame, but I know where that comes from. It's a really strong emotion, but for me personally, it comes from this story from childhood, and that story just flooded in. Maybe I'm not likable enough or cool enough, or maybe I'm boring and no one really cares about what I have to say or to offer, which is why I don't have a lot of friends. Maybe other women had figured something out that I hadn't figured out about how to be friends. Sometimes I felt like I was somehow missing a gene as a woman that allowed me to really connect with other women in some deeply authentic way. I could see other women doing this all around me, or at least I perceived that other women were doing this all around me. It was like I had this imposter syndrome about being a woman. Isn't that really bizarre? Yet there it was. And I knew exactly where that came from. I had been carrying that crazy imposter feeling since I was a teenager. When I was young, my mom remarried, and my stepdad had this idea that in order to be normal, and I'm using the word normal, you went out all the time when you were in high school and when you were in junior high, especially in high school. And I was really a nerd and I had a lot of trouble fitting in. And so there were a lot of weekends that I stayed home and I read a book. And my dad used to always say, "Why aren't you going out? Aren't you going out with friends? Don't you have plans?" And I would feel so horrible about myself when he would say that. But the thing I couldn't tell him was I was having trouble finding my friendship group in high school because everybody had started drinking. And I was so desperately afraid of being an alcoholic like my stepdad that I dropped a lot of groups of friends because once they started drinking, I felt really uncomfortable. I didn't realize that I could not drink and still hang out with them, that there would be nothing wrong with that, or that just by doing a little social drinking here and there didn't mean I would become an alcoholic like my stepdad. For some reason, I thought, even though it's crazy, I thought I would turn into him. And I definitely did not want to turn into him and be an alcoholic because I had experienced firsthand the pain of what that's like. But what this left me with was this left me feeling like I was unpopular, that I wasn't social enough, that there was just somehow something wrong with me. And that became a really big wound in my life. And I carried it with me for many, many years, unfortunately. And here's what it took me years of doing this work on myself to fully understand. You can be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly, achingly alone, because the opposite of loneliness isn't being around people, it's feeling connected to them. You can be at book club, at a work lunch, at dinner with your entire family, and sometimes you can still feel completely unseen. What you're missing isn't bodies in the room. What you're missing is the feeling that those people actually know you. So many women, they get to midlife and they have been involved in giant groups of women. They've been involved with activities at their kids' school. They might have been on the PTO. They might be in an organization at church. So it's not that you're not around other people, but it's that you haven't made the deep connections with people so they actually know you in a way that you feel important to them, that you feel valued. And that can feel really lonely. A friend said something to me recently that was really important, and it was really vulnerable of her to say. She said, I have 47 people I'd invite to my birthday party and exactly 0 that I would call at 2 a.m. if I was falling apart. Whew, I know that feeling. Because I felt that. Loneliness is the absence of what we would call emotional intimacy. So emotional intimacy is when you can show up as yourself, as your actual self, completely, not the polished version, the messy version, and you can be accepted by others. And emotional intimacy is really important, not just in our friendships, but also if we're in relationships. It's really important in those. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health epidemic. The research shows chronic loneliness carries health risks that actually rival smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's crazy. heart disease, dementia, depression, early mortality. The numbers are staggering. Isn't that unreal? That alone makes you prioritize nurturing relationships. But the numbers don't capture what it actually feels like. To me, it feels like you're watching the world, watching people engage and laugh and be really, really happy while you sit there feeling like you're in a foreign land where you're invisible. Like you could scream and absolutely no one would hear you, or you could disappear and no one would notice you were gone. That's a horrible feeling. There's some neuroscience behind all of this that I want to talk about because if you know me, I don't just say things off the cuff. They're always backed by research or science, but I always keep it in language everyone understands. The human race evolved in tribes. Our nervous systems deep inside of us, our central nervous systems, they need consistent, emotionally safe connection. And when we don't have that, our bodies register threat. This is one of the reasons why trauma is so hard for people. This isn't just emotional discomfort, it's biological stress. So when you're around a group of people and you don't feel that you belong, that you're accepted for who you are, your central nervous system actually gets activated and you feel anxious. Now, I want to talk about the things that women almost never say out loud. And because I'm a therapist, I'm privy to hearing a lot of these things. And I think it's helpful to do what we call normalizing some of this because oftentimes people feel like they are the only ones that feel this way when they're not. And anytime you feel like you are alone in something, it makes it feel so much worse. So it really helps to know that you're not the only one that feels a certain way. So these are things that women almost never say out loud about their marriages and about their friendships. So you can share a home or a bed, a life with someone for 25 years. And by the time we hit midlife, we've probably been with somebody for 25 years and you can still feel completely alone. And I've worked with couples that have been married nearly 3 decades who can run their households like a Fortune 500 company, but they haven't had a genuinely vulnerable, deep conversation in years. They co-parented. They built financial stability for their family. They survived illnesses, job changes, and difficult seasons. And somewhere in all of that, they actually stopped really connecting with one another. Sometimes just the busyness of life causes people to disconnect. We get so involved in our own priorities and so busy with our lives that we don't make the time to make our partners be a priority. We just don't. We've got too many other things going on. So for these couples, oftentimes that disconnected, like there's not a dramatic betrayal. There's no explosive affair. It's just a gradual disconnection. And real emotional intimacy requires 2 things from people: vulnerability from one partner and responsiveness from the other. You share something real and your partner receives it, not with a solution, not with trying to fix things, not with defensiveness, not by changing the subject, or not by looking at their phone or clicking the channel on the TV, but with actual presence. They actually listen to you and they hear you and they respond to you. And that's it. That's the whole formula. And it is shockingly so rare in so many relationships. Sometimes in midlife, you feel lonely because you realize that you and your partner have become roommates that talk about trivial things or administrative things or are so busy that you're like ships passing in the night. And it's scary to realize that and not know what to do about it. You can feel lonely and unseen when your partner watches TV while you try to talk to them. And when they respond to your vulnerable sharing with a list of solutions, ways you can fix your problems, that feels awful. When they make you feel like your feelings are too much or not quite right or a problem to be managed, that feels awful. It doesn't feel like connection. And then you're lonelier than you would be if you were living by yourself. And that's an awful thing. So midlife often exposes loneliness. It doesn't create it. It just exposes what you're truly feeling underneath the surface. When our kids leave, when our careers plateau or they shift, when our parents start needing care instead of giving it, the busyness that really kept us from truly thinking about our own lives and what we wanted, it starts to fade. And when we finally have some space in our brains to notice what does or doesn't exist in our lives, well, that's when it shows up. For so many of us, we spent our 30s and our 40s in survival mode. There wasn't even time to evaluate whether or not we felt emotionally connected. There was barely time to get enough sleep. The speed of that season of life kept us from looking too closely at anything we might be missing. But midlife slows our lives down. It slows things down just enough to expose that gap. We have also been the social glue. We're the ones who remember everyone's birthdays, plan gatherings, show up for other people. We are the connectors. But along the way, we often forget to make sure that we are feeling connected. We are so busy doing and taking care of everyone else, busy being needed, that we forget to make sure that other people see us, that our needs are met, that people see the things that we need in order to feel heard and seen and known. So what do we do with all of this? Because it's kind of depressing when you think about it. Well, we can do things with this. The first thing I had to do was confront the story I was telling myself, that I wasn't likable enough, that old story, that narrative that was always running through my head, that something was wrong with me, that other women had somehow figured out something I hadn't. I had to look that story in the face and decide if I was going to keep letting it run the show. The more we think negative thoughts, the more they cement in our brain, and only we can change them. So I realized I had to completely change that narrative by changing my thoughts. There wasn't anything wrong with me. I'd made choices that didn't prioritize building those relationships, whereas some of the other women I knew had done that. And I could make different choices now. And that reframe matters. It moves you from this feeling of shame into something we call agency. Agency is feeling like you have the ability to change your life, to make it what you want it to be. And agency is, to me, like the end-all be-all. I think as a therapist, I try to get my clients to really have agency for their lives. And that's a lot of what we do in midlife. We suddenly start to awaken to how our life is not what we want it to be, and we claim agency to make our life be better. Insight alone doesn't fix things like loneliness, but behavior does. So you can have the conscious thought that you're lonely and you know you need to change, but you actually have to do the things to change your behavior to nurture new relationships. That means actually auditing your relationships with some honesty, not just who's in your life, but how you feel after spending time with them. Do you feel energized or do you feel depleted? Do you feel seen or invisible, accepted or quietly managed or even manipulated by the other person? You don't need a large circle of friends. All of the research shows even just having 2 or 3 close friends is enough if you feel seen and authentic and you feel really connected to the person. You just need a few people who see you for who you are and they are okay with your authenticity and you feel like you belong together. And some of your relationships, when you do this audit, you're going to realize they need to go. A friendship where you're constantly walking on eggshells, where you can't share good news without it being minimized, where you feel worse about yourself after every interaction, or a relationship where you're constantly showing up for the other person, but they don't show up for you when you need it. It's genuinely better to be alone than to be with people who make you feel alone. I want to share a little story about my book club. I think you might find yourself in my story, but I realized in my 40s, so I was just newly into midlife, that I was in a book club with people from my neighborhood that I had been with for gosh, at that point, probably 10 years. And when I was at book club, I just didn't feel like I belonged. It was that old narrative that if I really said the things I wanted to say and I really showed up authentically as me, they wouldn't like me. So I had a lot of anxiety at book club. I thought a lot about what I needed to say. I constantly felt like I was interrupting because I was so nervous. I didn't know when to say the things I needed to say. I felt completely socially awkward because I didn't feel like I belonged. And belonging and fitting in are two different things. Fitting in is when you change yourself to get people to like you. Belonging is when people like you just because of who you are. So I didn't feel like I belonged, and I tried very hard to fit in. So, of course, because I'm recording this podcast, the lawnmower guy is here. So if you hear lawn mowing outside, I apologize. So here is what I did at book club. I decided one day I didn't want to be that way anymore. I wanted to feel like I really belonged with this group of women. And I just decided one day, fuck it. I'm just going to show up and be me. And if they don't like who I am authentically, then they're probably not my people. And so I just did that. It was like I pulled off all the masks and I just let loose with who I was and my goofy sense of humor. And you know what? They liked me more. Yes, exactly. They actually really liked me for who I was. And when I showed up as my authentic self, all of a sudden those relationships deepened. I was excited to go to book club. I couldn't wait. I felt so comfortable around these women and I could just talk about anything and it felt wonderful. So what a great story for owning ourselves and having the courage to show up and be authentic, which is what we need to do in order to nurture better relationships. I always like to share helpful content on my podcast, but I also like to share ideas to make your life better. So I want to talk a little about helping yourself with loneliness in friendships and in marriage. So let's tackle marriage first. So if loneliness is showing up in your marriage, and for a lot of women in midlife, it really is, start small. Share one honest feeling a day, not a complaint, just a feeling. Tell your partner exactly what you need. If you're in a relationship with a man, he's probably wired to fix things, not to show empathy, and he might be really uncomfortable with feelings because that's what our society does to men from the time they're boys. It tells them that feelings are for weak men and that their job is to be strong and to solve problems. They're supposed to stuff their feelings. So they really don't get the entire feeling thing. That doesn't let them off the hook, because we can help them learn the feeling thing. You can tell him, I don't need you to fix this. I just need you to sit with me and see what happens when you try that. See if they respond in a way that feels good. If not, tell them how that feels to you. They are not mind readers and they'll never know if you don't tell them. And when you tell them, I always encourage my clients to use honey and not vinegar. So we attract more flies with honey. I think that's the phrase, not vinegar. So I always tell people when they try to say something potentially conflictual to someone else to soften their tone, to be like honey, little sugar, okay? Share things in a kind way and start first with the word I, because whenever you start a conversation with you don't listen to me, it immediately puts the person on the defensive. So when you start with I, it helps to prevent that. We call that I statements in therapy. And another thing you can do if you're really feeling lonely in your relationship is start planning some date nights with your partner, some simple activities for the two of you to spend one-on-one time together. And if you don't know what to talk about when you're out with them, I've got a great list of questions that you can talk with your partner about to get to know each other better. And even in midlife, it's good to get to know each other better. I do have a free download from my website, and I will put the link in the show notes. So in terms of friendships, if you want to build new connections, this is the part that requires a lot of courage. You're going to have to be vulnerable first. You're going to have to text first, invite someone to do something first, risk someone being unavailable to you. You're going to have to be the one that says, hey, I'd really like to get to know you better. Would you like to go out and grab a cup of coffee? Or I'd love to actually get together sometime, and really mean it when you say it, not just say it off the cuff to be polite. Just like I had to put myself out there with my book club friends, I had to learn to nurture new relationships by being the one who reached out. Sometimes I felt a little rejected, but 95% of the time, the women I've reached out to have responded with genuine interest. Because guess what? Many of them were likely pretty lonely too, and they were assuming everyone else had this friendship thing down except for them. I want you to remember, most women are just as lonely as you are. They're just equally scared to admit it. So let's return to that woman in my office who felt like she'd missed her chance at friendships. She ended up starting a walking group, and it was a slow process. 2 women showed up the first week, and then gradually more and more showed up. And by the 3rd month, there were actually 8 of them walking and having real conversations about the things that matter to them, like how their parents were aging, about their marriages, about their worries for their adult children, about being grandparents, and about how they were finding themselves in midlife. And 6 months later, this client told me, I really didn't miss my chance. I just hadn't started. Loneliness isn't proof that you failed at friendship or marriage or life. It's a signal to you. It's midlife stripping away all the distractions and showing you where the depth in your life is missing, where something you really want is missing. And that awareness, as uncomfortable as it is, can move you into action if you let it. You built a life around being needed, and now you get to build one where you're truly known. And that's the work, and you're not too late for it. Thanks for listening today. If you're done playing by everyone else's rules and you're ready to create a better life, subscribe to the podcast, share it with a friend, and find me on Substack. Search for A Midlife Reckoning or find the link in the show notes. I'm Dr. Heather Anglin. Until next time, my wish for you is a life that's actually yours. Not what's expected of you, but what you want. Yours. And one more thing that I want to share for both ethical and legal reasons, and that is that everything I share on A Midlife Unfiltered is not intended to be therapy or medical advice. It's for educational purposes only. If you listen to this podcast and it deeply resonates with you and you know there are some things you need to work on to improve your life, I encourage you to seek out counseling or the advice of a medical doctor if you think that is something that would help you to create the best life for yourself. Thanks for understanding.